What's up, everybody? Welcome to this episode of Corner Table Talk. I'm your host, Brad Johnson, and we are exploring subjects related to food plus drink plus culture. And as always, with questions or comments about our show, you can reach me at brad@postandbeamhospitality.com. So one of my main objectives in the guests that we book on our podcast is to shed light on the role of the restaurateur within the hospitality world. Over the last several decades, as the business of restaurants has become ever more popular, the most celebrated member of the hospitality community has been the chef, hence the rise of the ubiquitous celebrity chef. Usually the restaurateur, whose responsibility it is to locate and select a location, negotiate a lease and or purchase property, contributes personally and or raises funds, creates a business plan, oversees design and construction, often before the chef is even in the picture. That is not to say that one is more important than the other, and sometimes that person is the same person. As we know, there are some chef operators too. That's a lot of responsibility. And often, though, these roles are two individuals, both fulfilling essential roles in the birth and operation of a restaurant. Cyrus Batchan is a Los Angeles-based restaurateur and owner of Number 8 Hospitality, a global hospitality and development group. He currently operates several places, including the very popular Koreatown spot, Lock and Key, La Rea, which is in Las Vegas, Sky and East West Brewery, both in Vietnam, of all places. And we're going to dive into that a little bit. I want to hear some of that backstory. Cyrus recently opened the very buzzy Arts District restaurant Camphor, which replaced his hit at that location, previously Nightshade. His places have received impressive accolades from various food press, including Eater LA, the Robb Report, Food and Wine, and GQ. Of course, for all restaurateurs, the past 2 years have been grueling on multiple fronts. An article from LA Weekly in November of 2021 illustrates some of the obstacles Cyrus has had to overcome and still, remain optimistic about the business. So, quote from that article, in the last 18 months, Koreatown Lock and Key bar owner Cyrus Batchan has endured mandatory closures and reopenings, multiple fires and robberies. He's come face to face with endless insurance company battles, as well as the vandals that ransacked and stole everything out of his beloved neighborhood bar, including the light fixtures. Still, he says, quote, the universe is on his side, end quote. So let's get into it today with my guest, Cyrus Batchan. Cyrus, thanks so much, man, for taking the time and joining me.
I appreciate you. Thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to speak.
Before we get started, I wanted to give a special shout out to your sister, Celessa Baker, who actually is the one who initiated an introduction that led to my starting a podcast. So thank you and shout out to Celeste. And she also introduced me to you. So I wanted to give her a little special shout out.
Master connector, big sis.
Master connector, yeah. So we get things going here with what I call our short order questions. So let me fire a few of those at you. Cyrus, what is on the playlist at your new place, Camphor, and who programs the music?
At Camphor, the current playlist, we're actually doing a lot of French hip hop. And it is a collaboration with one of our guests, one of my partners and myself, just curating and selecting a lot of French hip hop, since it is a French restaurant.
That's very cool, man. MC Solar, is he one of?
MC Solar's in there. There's Hocus Pocus. We have Ragasonic, which is like a reggae group. So getting through the laundry list of some amazing French hip hop. So
I love that, man. That's really cool. Tell me, what is your morning beverage? What's the first thing you're consuming liquid wise when you wake up?
Generally a glass of cold water followed by coffee, then followed by orange juice.
the trifecta.
But, yeah.
How about your exercise routine? What are you doing besides walking around restaurants at night to keep yourself physically fit?
That is one of the restaurateur's biggest challenges, I think, is always that work-life balance, because you always seem sucked in, and having a quiet moment is they're few and far between. But right now, a lot of walking with my two beautiful dogs and then trying to get myself back into my gym routine. So, but you know, the opening of a restaurant, you're always all the way in. So we're in the
Oh yeah.
first 6 weeks. So right now it's like gym is taking a break, and it's 10,000 steps a day in the restaurant plus some dog walking.
Yeah, man. When I think about how much mileage I put on my body in the 30 plus years in the restaurant industry of, every night on the floor, I could tell you my left knee and my hip, they remind me of
Yes,
that excess mileage.
absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me, last great meal at a restaurant that you don't own.
Last great meal at a restaurant that I don't own. Let's see. Actually, there's a really good shabu shabu place that I enjoy. It's one of my favorites. Actually, closing here in LA called Kagaya. I think he's been in business for 20 plus years. The owner's retiring, and I think that was last week actually. So that was phenomenal. It's always a hit. It's a one man show. I mean, he has a team, but he's making like an 8 or 9 course meal for you at a counter.
Love that, man. Good one. And tell me, if you can, name something that you most love about Los Angeles.
You know, Los Angeles for me, I've traveled the world. I've actually traveled more outside the US than I have it inside the US. And for me, Los Angeles, it is that kind of perfect balance of I can get out of the city, head up the coast to Malibu, get to the beach. I love to snowboard, so I can be in Mammoth in a few hours. So I think the beauty of Los Angeles, not only the fact that it's an extremely kind of like multicultural city, and all the great food, but it's also this great access to different parts of nature,
Oh
really
yeah,
centrally located. So
yeah. The microclimate access is amazing, man. I was
yeah,
in LA a couple of weeks ago. We were out in the desert and snow-capped mountains, and it was
yep,
75, and the desert, and just the skies just so clear and beautiful, man. Yeah,
beautiful. Yeah.
I love that about LA too. So Cyrus, let's jump in here. And clearly, we've talked a lot about this on the show in the last year. Of course, the pandemic, has had a profound effect on our industry. And it's well documented, the hardship that it brought on our industry. And I have to say, though, based on the quote that I read from LA Weekly, your case, you had some pretty unique challenges in LA in addition to the openings and closings. And you also voiced some frustration with the help, when you're looking for help, it kind of falling on deaf ears from local officials. And I want to talk about your perseverance, but before we do, describe what you've experienced in the last couple of years and how you've managed to keep your businesses afloat. And also, too, as part two to that question, since you do business internationally, how have those businesses fared in the last, 18 to 24 months?
Right. So, domestically, obviously, we all kind of, oddly enough, I was actually coming back from Vietnam February of 2020. So that was the beginnings of the grumbling of the pandemic. I arrived in LA. And like most people, we thought we were insulated. And then it quickly snowballed as I was seeing things develop in Asia because I had, a real direct line of communication to my businesses there. And as I saw things snowball, the challenges, for me were living at a place where I saw continuous growth. I think we were all in a boom. The LA restaurant scene was booming. I was looking at multiple opportunities, other leases on the table. And then, the world kind of slamming its brakes on, and, not for 1 month, but for what ended up being a couple years. So, the challenges of just being a restaurateur who was trying to figure out the regulations as we went along, coupled with, lock and key, which is, my longest standing business at this point. 3 days after the first stay-at-home order was initiated, we were ready for alcohol to go service. Countless hours, and I woke up to a phone call with all my staff saying, "Hey, are you looking at the Citizen app? There's a fire next to Lock and Key." Drove down, see the building, literally with a zero property line engulfed in flames right next to what was my kitchen at the time. And I'm just sitting here thinking like, wow, is the world really, this cruel at this moment? I've got a baby on the way. I've got businesses that are shut down. Globally, we don't know what this looks like. So those were the real challenges initially, was just kind of the gut check moment of, what do you do here? And how do you keep going? So that was the real first challenge. And that's kind of something we went through the entire time. Internationally, we are actually just now getting Vietnam back open. And Vietnam is a situation where, there were no PPP loans. The government did the best that they could, but it was just a country that just went into complete lockdown. They were the first country to ban any international travel. So they literally shut down the flights, I think 1 or 2 weeks after I left. You could not leave the country. And the only people that could come in were Vietnamese citizens, and that was few and far between. So we're actually just in the process of getting open. But then we're now dealing with some other challenges because most of the tourists that come to Vietnam are European. And so with everything going on in Ukraine, we're going to be losing out some access to certain tourist markets right now.
Wow, man. That's a lot. And, you mentioned the phrase gut check. That was part of my next question, because, I know as restaurateurs, we possess a special brand of optimism that, may be unique to our DNA, and that we go into areas that, previously were off limits for whatever reason. And we look at a building and think, oh, hey, this will make a great restaurant. I think, folks, when you probably thought about lock and key at that location, probably tilted their head sideways and said, what the hell is Cyrus thinking? This is not a great, area for a bar. But you saw something. But when you were going through that, Cyrus, in the midst of, so much uncertainty and just one kind of setback after another, the fire, and then you got robbed, and people stole the light fixtures from your place. And I also read where you at one point somehow came face to face with the folks that had done it, and your good sense told you that you could recover from the robbery, but better probably not to confront those folks. But just what was going on, man? What was your inner dialogue like during that period that just made you, put your head down and just get back to work?
It was weird. I have these moments thinking back of it now, and I always think about that. What am I going to tell my son about this time? Because I think it's just a moment in history. And obviously I had a unique set of circumstances. I think at that time, it was the first thing that kicked in was instinct, the instinct of a restaurateur, or a business person, which is stay busy. So the very first thing I did, was, okay, how are we going to plan these to-go drinks? Then after that, the fire happened. I didn't have a kitchen. I wasn't really even thinking about that. I started utilizing some funds that I had access to just buy meals, and I started supporting other businesses. So I figured, I'm in a place where I'm at least healthy, that, I was going out to other food trucks. We did, pop up with some brothers in South Central one day where we fed 100 people. I just covered the cost of the meals. So I think the business mind kicked in, which is almost like a shock. And I think that's the reaction that restaurateurs especially always have, is you got to keep running, right? So whatever the issue is or the problem is, the fryer's not working today. Go grab a pot, get some oil in it. Let's create a deep fryer because we have to sell this dish. So I think it was that instinctual, which is very ingrained in most restaurateurs, which is keep going, keep going, keep going. And I liken it now when I think about it as what a marathon runner must go through when they're in the last mile stretch, right? You don't think about that at mile 1, but you're thinking about it throughout the entire race, right? You get into that last kilometer or mile, got to keep going, got to keep going. So when I step back now and think about it, it was that, is I looked at all these challenges as things that could be overcome, and whether I was really honed in on it or it was just basically ingrained in my DNA as a restaurateur, which is keep it pushing, just go. Yeah.
And I think what strikes me too about what you're saying is not only did you keep it going, but your instinct was to do something to take care of other people, in the midst of all that was going on. And I think that's pretty telling. I think as a restaurateur, one of the you have to have at the heart and soul of how you move is the desire. It's hospitality, man. We're in the business to make sure everybody else is okay.
Yep. Yeah, that was my first thought, was that when the pandemic hit, I went to the grocery store across the street from my house, saw everything going on. I immediately called my US Foods purveyor, which is the largest purveyor, said, I need to order all these like shelf stable products because I want to get my staff taken care of. That was the first, I guess, thing that I did. And then after that, it was just, looking for those opportunities, because that is hospitality, right? That's what we do every day, is take care of guests that come in. And whether people, look at it that way or not, if you're really a true hospitality person, I look at every guest as somebody who's coming into my home, whether they know who I am or not, and I want to give them that best experience. So that, I think, again, it's in the DNA, so it just came out in a different way.
Yeah, man. And I'm reminded of how we spend so many plates, and yet we keep a cool front, to the customer. You never want them to know the drama that may be unfolding behind the scenes that's making, your job a little more difficult, but you can't let them see you sweat, so to speak. So I think we do that well. We camouflage the stress well, hopefully not to our own detriment. So Cyrus, I want to get in a little bit before we go further in your professional background, just get into your family life, because your background is really, really interesting, the mix of your parents. So your dad is African American and your mom is first generation Iranian American. You grew up in Moreno Valley, which is about an hour, I think, outside of LA. That's Riverside County, right?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, man, tell us a little bit about your folks. How did your parents meet? What was life like in your home growing up? What kind of food was crossing that dinner table? What were the conversations like? I know your dad inspired you. There's restaurateurs in your family. Talk a little bit about the family life.
Family life, my parents met, I think I want to say 1973. So my dad was from Orange, Texas, which is the last city southeast Texas before you cross into Louisiana. So right on the border, I think 10 miles from the border of Louisiana. If you look up my family name, it's all basically Orange, Texas and Lake Charles, Louisiana. So great food country for sure. So that the food was very important. But my dad, I think when he graduated high school, ended up joining the army, because I think, in the 60s, like a lot of brothers at that time, was like that was your out of the South. Like, where did you get to go? And then ended up in Germany, had a great aptitude. My dad had a wonderful mind for mathematics and science, was a radio engineer, programmer. And then when his contract came up in the army, he decided Vietnam or look for another opportunity. He got hired by, at that time, Western Union, who was doing the teletypes, and they sent him to Iran. And so he was in Iran in the early 70s, teaching, working on the communication systems in Iran, and then ended up meeting. He got a big project where he repaired something. They wanted to bring him to meet, I think, one of the advisors to the Shah. My mom happened to be the person who was doing his paperwork. So they met, hit it off, romance. And then my sister was actually born in Iran. They left Iran in 74 to come to the US to go to school. And then he wanted to get his master, finish college, get his master's, and they wanted to return to Iran. Revolution happened. They went from San Francisco, ended up from Moreno Valley. And at that time, kind of growing up, my mom at first was a cosmetologist. Then, my dad had a love for cooking. My mom always says she learned to cook because she had a family. And they ended up looking outside of the cosmetology role for my mom, and they started jumping into restaurants. So food in my family was definitely the binder. My dad was old school, no TV, family meals are together. At some point in life, he was building smokers in the backyard, doing his own boudin, because he's like, you can't find good boudin here. So food was the glue that definitely held us together. And it was everything from Persian food to soul food to Thai food to, smoking turkeys in this homemade smoker for the neighborhood on the weekend. So, any genre of food, my dad literally would get us in the car every weekend and we would just drive to eat. So we would drive to LA Thai Town in the 80s. And I'm like, Thomas guide. He's like, oh, you got to page E4 and you got to go left here and right here. And I think about it now, I was like, how are you finding these places? There was no Google, no nothing, but that was a big part of our life was, kind of that food. And it was any food, any good food was game for the family. So.
Such a great background, man. Such a great story. The whole thing, how they met and the circumstances and, the life now in California. Tell me, Cyrus, as someone of mixed ethnicity growing up and going to school, did you feel different? Were you received differently? Were people curious about if they saw your mom and dad together? I asked for personal reasons. And my mom was Italian, my dad was Black, so I certainly felt some of those things myself, but I'm curious what your experience was.
Yeah, so we went, oddly enough, I think until sixth grade, no, actually till fifth grade, my sister and I actually went to a private Baptist school out in Paris that was on the way to my father's job. And I think we were 2 of 5 African Americans in the school. And then, after that, we transferred into public school. And it's that interesting identity. We were doing, Persian family parties on the weekend. Most of my dad's family was up in Oakland or San Diego. So we would take time to jot out there, different cultural experience. And it was the idea when people looked at us is Are you Dominican? Are you Hispanic? Are you this? Are you that? And, you know, and even in high school, I think my senior year of high school, I was president of the BSU, and I would go to conventions, and it's almost like, oh, it's the light skinned brother. Like, you're not
Would
necessarily.
you get the "What are you?" question?
Exactly. Like, oh, is he Puerto Rican? So, you know, it's definitely an interesting, I think, experience kids of mixed backgrounds go through, because it's the idea sometimes of, are you Black enough? Are you this enough? Are you that enough? And how do you identify? You know, the experiences that I've had I consider myself a Black man, even though I have, you know, of Persian descent as well. The experiences that I've had, whether it be with, you know, being profiled or anything like that, those are very unique to us as a culture, and you get those. So it doesn't matter. I don't think it matters the complexion. You know, it is how you identify and all the things you go through. And sometimes we have it pretty rough being of a mixed descent, I would say.
It cuts both ways, man. You know,
Yeah,
without a doubt.
my son.
And I want to come back to how I admire that, so far, at least to this point, your ventures, your restaurant ventures, you really just kind of, there's no box you put yourself in terms of the cuisine limitations in it. But I want to come back to that. How did the extended families get along? Your dads and your moms? Was everybody cool with the blend?
Immediate, like my mother, my grandmother, grandfather, uncles, all very cool. I think my mom actually was at one point forced to change her name by some of her uncles and like great uncles, because they're like, no, our family can't marry outside of the Iranian culture. So, they had that experience as well. But my immediate family, my grandmother, super religious person. They were practicing Muslims when she was alive. And I remember her coming here at one time and telling my mom, we were driving right when we got back from LAX, and she's told my mom she wanted to pray because it was prayer time. And she's like, what is that building? My mom said, oh, it's a church, but it's a Christian church. She's like, God is God, pull over, I need to go pray. And so that was, my immediate, my grandmother, grandfather, that was them. They're extremely religious people, but also very just, welcoming and open and even keeled people. And right is right, fair is fair. The moral compass was true north.
So how has that informed your worldview, given that experience as a kid growing up in that kind of environment?
I think it is, that idea of right is right, and always just look for the opportunity to do the best and give the best. Looking past anything and everything. And I look at that first and foremost. I think with especially my work family, and it is always taking care of them, making sure that they're good, making sure they have the opportunities they need, making sure they're treated, fairly, doling out business advice to the employee who's on his way out the door. Just always trying to look for that opportunity to give something back, I think.
Right. So moving forward a little bit here. So you studied law and real estate at San Diego School of Law, and then those are pretty valuable skill sets when it comes to the restaurant world and negotiating or purchasing real estate, negotiating leases, what have you. And while at the San Diego School of Law, you blended your passions and you became the director of bars and nightlife for the W Hotel in San Diego. And additionally, you had a successful nightlife events company. So you're going to law school, you're running hospitality venues at the W and an events business. When did you sleep?
I didn't sleep, and technically in law school, you're not supposed to work more than 40 hours, but I was definitely working more than 40 hours. So I kind of got my first year of law school, you do what's called an oral argument at the end of the year, part of your legal research class. And I won this argument. And one of the judges, it was like two professors, and one of the judges happened to be an attorney. And you typically get an internship maybe after your first year, and you get a paid internship in your second year. Well, after that argument, that judge reached out to my professor and said, I want to offer Cyrus a paid internship. And he's like, what? He's a first year. He's like, no, I want to offer him paid internship. So I took this internship working at this law firm, huge law firm, Wilson, Moser, Edelman, and Dicker, like 5 names. They did insurance defense for large, like pharmaceutical companies. At the time, I think it was like Herbalife or one of those companies. So I was working there, and on my way to lunch one day, I see the W opening up. And I just like, oh, wow, I know the W, because at the time my sister was doing the music thing in LA. So we were always, on the weekends, we were up at the Randy Gerber's bar at the W in Westwood. And I was like, this would be a cool place to work. Popped in, did an interview, and then got the gig initially as a concierge. And then they promoted me into like booking DJs and gave me this bump up. But very quickly decided that I was more passionate about that opportunity versus being stuck in this office in a suit during the day, and then just made the pivot. And then from there, it was the DJs I was booking started doing events, and really took that opportunity to just kind of sew myself back into what I've always known. You know, I grew up in restaurants, grew up in hospitality. You know, my mom was always hosting large gatherings, and my parents kept asking me, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And my response to them was, "I've been in, you know, this industry since I was 5 years old. What do you expect me to do?" It's innate to me, right? And it actually brings me joy.
You felt that. Did your family actually own restaurants?
Yeah, so growing up, I think, you know, my parents were probably involved in no less than like maybe 10 or 15 restaurants, all small mom and pops. But, you know, almost every single restaurant that my family's been involved in, even though they've sold it, they're still in existence today. So I think they opened their first restaurant on their own in '81. It was a Mexican restaurant called El Toro, which is now called the Mexican Kitchen. And that was, you know, I spent the better part of my life kind of growing up, my sister and I, in that restaurant, better part of like 10 or 15 years.
That's very cool, man. So, all right, so you get the bug again. It was something that was already, the groundwork was laid, obviously, from your childhood, and you walk into the W. You feel inspired again to re-engage with the industry. And in 2012, you started I think it was 2012, you started Number 8 Hospitality and opened Lock and Key in Koreatown. So Cyrus, how did that come about, man? What was it about Koreatown? Why that particular location? Talk a little bit about how that deal came together for you.
So yeah, at that time I was actually working with Hill Harper, helping him with managing some real estate projects. And a lot of the projects happened to be in Koreatown that we were kind of going through. And I had a subset of friends who happened to be Korean. So we would spend, you know, kind of weekends eating out there, really harken me back again to my childhood, finding these great places. And then I started looking at the demographic of what the market was and where the market was going from a business perspective, right? And I really looked at it. People tell me now, they're like, you looked at it almost like a McDonald's play. It's like you're looking at the ground and saying, what does this ground need? And then I started looking at my friends. When we would finish eating dinner, they would say, hey, like, we got to go to Hollywood, or hey, we got to go to downtown LA, which I think at that time Varnish and these bars were opening. And I scratched my head. I said, look, Koreatown is centrally located. It's smack dab in the middle between Hollywood and downtown. You can get to the west side very easy, not far from West Hollywood. All these, you know, starving actors and actresses that are moving into LA, where are they living? Where's the cheap rent? But where do they want to go, and what do they need, and what do they want? You know, they want a better or cooler experience. So I really looked at it that way, and then got sucked back into Koreatown. To me, has a very cool cross section of LA. It's extremely centrally located, and I think it has, you know, some very specific history, you know, for me, part of my experience in LA. So I really wanted to find a location, and literally on the work to a project site one day, just drove past the building. I was like, huh, this might be it. And
Was it an existing bar restaurant?
It was a karaoke bar. It was an existing karaoke bar. And I just looked at it, and it, you know, like you said earlier, it's the weird thing about being a restaurateur. And I always ask myself, does everybody have it? But I know certain people do. It's like you just see something, or you walk into a space and you just close your eyes and you're like, this is it. Yeah. And you can't really articulate what that means in that moment, but you just know. And so when I did the first walkthrough with the broker, literally had that moment. I was like, give me a quiet second in here alone. And I was like, all right, this is it. Like, just knew.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that, man. It's an instinct about a space, you know, and not in its current form, but how the bones speak to you, and then what your vision, you know, as you're sitting there and thinking about what it could, you know, transform into. How big a space is Lock and Key square footage wise?
It's like a little bit under 3,000 square feet, like 2,900 square feet with a patio.
And was there something architecturally about the space that spoke to you? Was it high ceilings or?
No, didn't have high ceilings. I'll share some photos with you after. It was chopped up, and people like still scratch their head. It was chopped up into 8 karaoke rooms. So we took it down to the studs and just re-envisioned it. First, I think it was location and the fact that it did have a patio, because to me, that was one of the things. It's like a rooftop in New York. A lot of places in LA don't have rooftops or patios at that time, 10 years ago, especially, that I felt it was something that was missing. So I had that opportunity. And then I just felt major thoroughfare, easy access to the freeway. You know, that was right before Uber blew up. People were still driving. And I thought, this is easy to get to. So
Parking?
no parking. And that was that was what everybody told me. You have no parking, but we made it work. And then Uber took off. So I was like, you don't need parking.
LA became more like New York in that way.
Yeah.
And what about financing? How were you able to pull together the funds?
It literally, I mean, that was bootstrap. I did that project for a few $100,000, took what savings I had, tapped into some family members, some friends, and just literally bootstrapped it down to the day that business opened. I think I took like my last few $1,000s out of the bank just to make change for the register. And it was, you know, we were rolling like Vegas. It was just, okay, let's put it back down. Oh, we got aces. Let's split. Let's just go. Let's go. So I literally remember sitting in the table, just thinking to myself, I just took my last X amount of money out of the bank in order to like wager it on this, just to put money in the register.
Open up, and what happens?
Opened up, very positive feedback. And then a week in, serendipity struck. Anthony Bourdain's No Reservations show aired for CNN, and the first episode's Koreatown. Didn't know that was going to happen. And then the phone is ringing off the hook. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, everybody thought, what is Koreatown? I need to know about it, because we just got this national platform. So it was a little bit of, I guess, you know, the icing on the cake for me, but also just validation to the idea that I already knew that Koreatown was that cool.
Right.
And so we just happened to be there at the moment. And then Anthony Bourdain comes on and says, yes, Koreatown is that cool.
I love it, man. I love it. Your instinct is right on the money. That was a great call. So the success of Lock and Key led to opportunities, as we earlier alluded to, in Vietnam. And it's interesting to me because you hadn't been in business that long. So talk a little bit about the Vietnam opportunities, how those came about. And that's a big leap. It's not like doing Koreatown and Santa Monica. You know, you're talking about, you know, Koreatown and then Vietnam. That's a lot of travel. How'd that happen?
So I've honestly spent, you know, when I was doing my undergrad, my education path, and I really told this story to somebody the other day, was I honestly saw myself becoming a diplomat. I sat for the Foreign Service exam many times. I had an international relations major. I wanted to go to Johns Hopkins for a graduate degree. I looked at studying abroad at the American University in Cairo. So I always had this like travel bug and an idea of doing something, you know, outside of the US. And so when I really go back and think about it, I was always kind of pushing myself with this idea of like traveling and doing things abroad. It just came in a different form. But Vietnam specifically, when I opened Lock and Key, cocktail culture at that time was just really booming in LA. And I tell people, you know, 20 years ago, when people wanted to open a cocktail bar, they looked to London. They maybe looked into New York. San Francisco has always had an underground scene. And then Portland came on later. And I really looked at who are we serving here, right? I felt like LA is a much greater connection to Asia versus New York, right? It's a direct connect. Looking at some of my clientele, you know, a lot of, they call them American-born Chinese, Taiwanese, things like that. And cocktail culture hadn't taken off in Asia yet. So I was looking at this strictly as, I love to travel. I have a lot of friends in Asia. What's the opportunity? How can I make this connection? So the original idea was actually Taiwan. That was a direct connect. And so a year and a half after opening, I planned a trip. It was my first time to get out of LA to go to Taiwan. A really good friend of mine was like, hey, I'm moving back to Vietnam. You're going to be in Asia. Come visit me. So hopped on a plane, went to Vietnam first. I meet their father, who I'd known previously, who moved back to Vietnam, was a boat person. And they were actually planning on building a hotel. So we spent a week literally going from North Vietnam all the way to South Vietnam, talking life, business, just the three of us, my partner, his father, and myself. And they landed on this town, Nha Trang. They bought a piece of property, and they're like, we're gonna do a hotel here. I left. I go to Taiwan. I arrive in Taipei. I have great meetings. I see some good friends. We find a location. I fly home, and I tell everybody at that time, December of 2014, I was like, I'm moving to Taiwan in December, and I'm going to make sure I can live there, and then I'm going to open Lock and Key there. A week after I arrived, my friend texts me. He's like, hey, my dad wants to talk to you. Get on the phone, and he tells me, he's like, hey, Cyrus, listen, my sons are not ready for business. He's like, you're like their brother. He's like, I see a lot of you and me. He's like, I don't know anything about the bar business, but I think I found a location. We're not ready for a hotel. Come back to Vietnam tomorrow. And I was like, this is June. I said, yeah, I can't get back to Vietnam tomorrow. He's like, no, you have to come. I was like, I'll come back in a couple weeks because I have to resettle everything. I then book a flight, I think 4th of July weekend. I was like, I can get away. I arrived in Vietnam July 3rd, 2014, 24-hour flight, door to door. I was planning on being there for 3 days only, just to see this location. Drive straight to the airport. They take me straight to the location, which is a rooftop. Bring me up to the rooftop. We're looking around. I did the same thing I did at Lock and Key. It was like, give me a minute up here alone. And then I walked down the stairs, go to my friend's dad. I said, where do we sign? And he's like, oh, funny you say that, because the owner of the hotel is downstairs. And I'm like, I'm in a Lock and Key t-shirt, baseball cap, and shorts. I was like, no, I need to go, change into a suit, and we got to negotiate. He's like, this is Vietnam, it's okay. And we literally walked down after that 24-hour flight into one of the conference rooms, and on a napkin, it's, the owner of this hotel, who owns hundreds of millions of dollars real estate, myself, my partners, and we're scratching out the lease on the back of a napkin in this restaurant. So it was a crazy experience. Yeah.
And how soon after that did you open?
And we open, the funny thing is, sorry, that was July 5th. We opened July 3rd, 2015. So sight unseen, in 1 year, 40-story rooftop without access to a crane. We built this business literally from an idea into opening and welcoming our first guests in less than a year. And that's when I had the bug, I think, at that point from Vietnam, because, as a restaurateur and as a business person, when you develop, especially in a city like LA, it's like you could spend a year in permits.
Yeah.
Right. It was, we're building a bar here. Boom, let's make it happen. And we built it to an international standard, but it was just the regulations there. But if you're able to kind of navigate them, and you're basically presenting a good plan, the doors open up and allow you to basically be an entrepreneur.
And what was the response from the public?
Response was great. At the time we opened, I think we were the highest rooftop bar in Vietnam. We were in a tourist market. We saw some challenges. I think the Russian market was the #1 tourist market when we first opened. The ruble collapsed. Then Chinese and Europeans came in. So we're definitely a tourist market. I would tell everybody, it's like doing business on a cruise ship. You have a captive audience for 3 days, and then they leave, and then they come back. So in some ways it's a bit more forgiving, but then the demand is extremely high because people are there for 3 days. They're all about consumption. I want to eat, drink. I want to go, see what the nightlife is. And we built a place that is multifaceted. It's has an observation deck. So during the day, we let people come up. We have a skywalk with binoculars. You can kind of see the whole bay. And then in the evening, it turns into a restaurant and nightlife.
Very cool, man. Very cool. All right, so let's come back to LA. You opened Nightshade in 2018, I believe.
18, yeah. We were working on that space, I think, looking for a location and everything. Basically took us almost 2 years, 2016 to 2018. We softly opened December 2018 to like a private party, and then we actually opened January 2nd, 2019. So
you said you were looking for that space. So you had a concept in mind that needed a location, or what came first, the location?
So the idea was we were looking for another location to do an expansion. No chef, like kind of what you alluded to earlier. No chef, no nothing. Gonna open a restaurant, find a location. And then somewhere along the way, we identified a chef, and then we were in a deal in Hancock Park originally. That fell through. And then this other location became available.
Right. So You work with a Top Chef winner at Nightshade, Mylin, I think her name was, right?
Yeah.
And prior to working with you, she was the sous chef at the really popular but short-lived Michael Vitazio restaurant, Inc. I never made it there, and I know it wasn't around. They had some partnership issues, and that place didn't last. And so one of the things that I mentioned earlier, I just wanted to tap into because I admire your willingness to not be constrained by feeling like as a Black man you need to do a certain kind of restaurant, either cuisine wise, design wise, or even where you choose to go. And in this case, you bring in Maylin, you do this concept for Nightshade. It's a big hit, a lot of accolades, people loved it. So how do you approach that? Do you just not see yourself inside of any kind of box in terms of how you define what it is you should be doing? You just feel free to do whatever you think the market has an appetite for, or you have personal appetite for?
Right. I think it's a little bit of both. I'm always reminded of something my dad said to me. He went to obviously an all-Black school in Orange, Texas, right? Segregation existed for when he was growing up. And he always told me this idea of, always preach Black excellence, right? Which is just because I went to an all-Black school didn't mean we weren't excellent. We were excellent, and we were the best at whatever we wanted to do. He was amazing in mathematics. His brother was an all-star athlete. So I was raised, I think, in an environment where you don't set boundaries for yourself, even though and I always tell people this, one generation before me, and there are still boundaries that exist now, but one generation before me, those boundaries were as black and white as they could possibly be, right? So my dad always pushed this idea of just being excellent in whatever you were going to do, right? And it didn't matter what that was, you decided that for yourself. So when I look at things, and I look at a location, when I look at an opportunity in this industry as a restaurateur or as a chef or as an operator, I think ego gets the better part of a lot of people. And I've always tried to remove the sense of ego and look at things from a brass tacks. Is this a good business decision? And so when I look at an opportunity or I'm looking forward to create an opportunity, I really look at it as a business decision of there's a hole in the market. Let's fill it. Let's put the parts together. Let's do it. So I think that is why, and it's funny, if you come to Lock and Key and you have an experience there and you go to now what's Camphor, you have experience there, very different. They're extremely different, right? A lot of the customers that go to Camphor would not enjoy a night out at Lock and Key on a certain level because it's young, it's loud, it's boisterous. But that doesn't mean they're both individually great businesses. So I think that is, taking that life lesson and just really looking at things from a business perspective is I shouldn't feel that I have to be forced into a box. And I was talking to a young brother the other day about that, is the idea that, why does it always have to be, if they're looking for us, do I have to own a soul food restaurant? Do I have to own like a Caribbean restaurant? No, I can be a successful businessman, just like, Jerry Lorenzo can be a successful designer. It should be greater than, how you see us, because we just have maybe a talent or something that we want to contribute. So when I look at businesses, I don't look at pigeonholing myself. I can open an ice cream shop. I can open a coffee shop. I just want to do good business.
Love that, man. So, Mei Ling, what was it about her food, Cyrus, that appealed to you? Did you do tastings with her and she won you over?
We didn't taste anything. I had a business partner at the time that had met her, and he made the connection, and we just kind of took a gamble at that, honestly, and the gamble paid off.
Yeah. Now I know that relationship unraveled a bit. Talk about whatever you're comfortable talking about, but I'm really interested in what your takeaway was from the experience with what you went through there.
I think every business, we had the pandemic obviously hit, there was a lot of uncertainty. So there's just, differences of opinion or vision or whatever it may be. The takeaway for me, I think, in that, like any business relationship, is that it's okay for people to go their separate ways. It's okay to do new things, and it's not always going to be destined to work out. So I think, the takeaway for me has been the idea of continuing to persevere and sometimes just letting go.
Yeah, and I'm also glad, and we talked a while back, about this a little bit, but I'm also glad that, you're letting your name get out there a little bit because again, and it's, having been in that position my entire life as a restaurateur and not a chef, oftentimes I did feel that our role as multi-layered and as important a process as it is can be overlooked, and sometimes to our own detriment when it comes time to bring attention to a project, that when we need that attention, sometimes you need the chef for the press that you haven't generated for yourself. So I'm glad to see you start to be mentioned in these articles in a prominent way. I think that's a really positive development, and people should know who you are. You're a fantastic operator. So let's talk about Camphor. You've teamed up again here with a couple of two veteran chefs, of Alain Ducasse restaurant experience. And I think one of them previously worked with you, the pastry chef, but worked with you at Nightshade. But you're getting, some really, really like buzzy stuff. People are excited about this place. I've seen pictures. I haven't been there yet, but it looks really beautiful. I sent the link to my son, Bryce, and his girlfriend, who are foodies, and they're making reservations for this week. Place looks beautiful, man. Elegant, simple, clean. I love the style. So Eater describes it as a French bistro, but it sounds to me like you've also merged some of the elements of the restaurant that was formerly at that location, Nightshade. Is that accurate, or just talk about a little bit what Camphor is?
So the concept Camphor, and I think Chef Max. So it's actually, and this is very unique because I had a previous working relationship with Max, who is a savant when it comes to pastries, but is also equally talented on the savory side. And so they're actually co-chefing. These two chefs who met, they're actually co-chefing. So, the idea of pride of work versus ego is very evident, I think, in what they do, because very rarely do you see a restaurant that has a co-chef marquee. So the greatest story that the way I can describe it is what Max told me when he was kind of pitching me the idea of doing it when I approached him about the space is, one of the chefs, Lijo, is from a place called Kerala, India, which is southwest India, coastal city. And he told me this story on a Zoom call when they were still in Thailand. He said, imagine three, classically trained French chefs are on a boat and they get marooned on this seaside village in India. And they want to open a French bistro, but they have to do it with local ingredients. Imagine, and I just kind of was taken to a place, and literally that was the pitch. No menu, no describe what it is. And then we kind of launched the restaurant. We were tasting food up until the last probably like 24 hours of opening. Menus, I think, arrived to print the day of our first opening. And it really is a bistro menu. It's a very broad menu. And it is 90, I would say 3 to 5% French, extremely classic technique, but all of the spices that they're using in the food we're directly importing from farms in India. That when Lijo went home before he came to LA, and it's his first time ever coming to the US, he basically set out and just drove around to all the farms in the region surrounding his hometown, and was meeting with spice purveyors and things like that, and identifying, the pepper that we use for our steak au poivre is basically an ungraded pepper, meaning that it's Malabar pepper. They basically extract the pepper from a tree. It literally, no size, shape, no grading, everything goes into a bag and it's shipped directly to our door. So a very unique flavor, because sometimes, places are using a very select grade of pepper. And then we take that, it's untoasted, we actually toast it on site, mortar, pestle it, and use it in the food. So the I guess South Asian elements are subtle, and throughout there's a couple dishes that it pops through, but a lot of the food, it's extremely subtle. And Max also said, he's like, French food is amazing, and they work for one of the greatest French chefs in the world, but they're like, a lot of times it's very decadent, it's very rich, and it doesn't have a flavor, a spice flavor profile. So they're just adding that few percent of spice into, instead of butter, maybe it needs a pepper, maybe it needs a salt or a different spice.
That sounds fascinating. It reminds me a little bit of a place. They opened up a branch in LA, but I knew the original owner, Jean Goutal, in New York, opened La Coloniale. and it was French Asian inspired, and reminds me a little bit of what you're talking about here. But it sounds fantastic. Cyrus, what dish is the most requested? What's the top selling dish right now?
The chicken is probably the number one dish, and if you look at our Instagram profile, it's a phenomenal dish. They essentially, you're eating half a chicken, and they basically they butcher the chickens every night. They take all of the dark meat, they trim all the wings and remove the bones. They take the dark meat, like the thigh meat, all that, they make it into a mousse with some masala spices, some truffle. They pipe that back under the skin of the breast, and then that's aged, or it's basically roasted, and you almost get this kind of like a Peking duck skin. And then so you're basically eating the light and the dark, and that mousse acts to keep the breast extremely moist. They take everything else and they make that into basically a jus that is then put on top of the chicken. So when you get this dish that looks, succinct and small, a lot of technical effort, but when I tell people that, hey, that you're actually eating half a chicken, because that is everything from a half a chicken right in front of you, and it looks like just a breast.
You're killing me, man.
Yeah.
That sounds so good.
We got to get you out.
So prices on everything, as we have been experiencing, from the gas pump to the grocery store, are just skyrocketing. And of course, our operating costs in restaurants, from labor to food to supplies to to-go containers. I mean, everything's through the roof. So you're full service there, right? I mean, there's table service,
yep,
host at the door, or you at the door, Celeste, your sister, whomever, somebody's at the door. How are you handling the model now, Cyrus, in terms of trying to improve the margin where it's a challenge, because we can only raise prices, so much before the customer is just going to, just not be able to stomach that. So how do you look at this model now?
Well, I think first is that's something what you've mentioned is something that's worth speaking on. And I give people this very specific example. I think LA or New York has the pizza versus the metro. I just was reading about that, like that index where they look at the price of a slice versus the price of a metro ride. And I think for the first time, the slice has actually outpaced the price of a metro ride, right? And so I would tell people this story is, when I opened Lock and Key in LA, minimum wage was $8. A well cocktail drink of a decent well, we weren't pouring like a Gilby's vodka or gin, which is your $2 plastic bottle. We're pouring something decent, was $8. From 2013 to 2015, or 2015, 16, 17, the minimum wage price went from $8 to $15, and now we're going to $16.50. So it's more than doubled. But I can't charge you $16 for that same well drink. Maybe I can get up to 12. But right, so it's looking at that margin. So depending
on whether it's Koreatown, the Arts District, or Beverly Hills,
Hollywood, exactly.
Location matters.
Exactly. So I think the Arts District is definitely becoming the dining mecca of LA, and that kind of was happening prior to the pandemic. You've got some amazing restaurants. Bavel set it off. Now you've got Bestia, you've got Damian, you've got us, you've got Girl and the Goat, you've got Cha Cha Cha. So I think people are ready to spend. The bigger challenge that we're facing now outside of that is the labor cost. People, expect to get paid significantly more. The labor talent pool that people are willing to work, I've never seen it as rough. And I've been telling my managers, as a restaurateur, as an owner, we've got years in experience in interviewing people, and we've got a thick skin when it comes to reading 100 resumes, landing on 25 that you want to interview, and out of that 25, 4 you give a try, maybe 1 gets a job. And that was before. And now it's maybe you don't even get 100 resumes, and the 25 you get, it's, I'm not ashamed to say it, we have people that are working in our kitchen that have never worked in a restaurant before, that these 2 great young chefs are taking a shot at, and they're home cooks, for lack of a better term, that they're training at this level. And, people are working 15 hours, and I'm always coming in every Wednesday saying, we got to get overtime down. We can't run like this. But the model right now has literally looked at that. We've adjusted prices incrementally along the way. I'm really looking at ways to, modify the labor so we're not hitting so much overtime. And it takes a constant management. And that management was significantly easier pre-pandemic because the ability to get more hands on deck was easier. You weren't facing all these external pricing pressures. So it really takes a constant management. And, I've told everybody, I don't expect, in the first 6 months to be profitable. We expect to make money and cover cost while we fine tune this model. And there are a lot of dials to be turned. And so, whether it's looking at a cleaning supply or a cleaning service or changing your hours of operation, by 30 minutes, we're looking at every metric. And we are in unprecedented times, I can tell you that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and you alluded to it as well, but, these, whatever the pandemic accelerated stuff that was already in the pipeline. We were facing, labor shortages well before the pipeline. We saw the minimum wage increasing, and we knew that, front of the house starts getting more, then the cook is not going to be happy to get, your line cook's not going to be happy to get what the server's making, and because the server's getting tips. And
right.
We opened Post and Beam in 2012, probably around the same time you did Lock and Key, and saw the labor costs go up. We started with 2 or 3 hostesses at the door, and by 2018 it was me,
right,
and running to the kitchen to check the line. So on that note, as a restaurateur, I know, I had certain pet peeves going into the dining room. I'm always there pre-service, but light adjustments, music adjustments, constant throughout the night, making the rounds, of course, touching tables, keeping an eye on what's going on with guests is just a regular part of the maintenance. Keeping an eye on the pickup line, making sure the tickets are not, there aren't too many tickets across the board, food's not dragging. But I'm curious how you read the room when you're working the dining room on a particular night. What's your mode of operation, Cyrus? How do you approach service from the restaurateur owner standpoint?
I think, for me, it has always been, again, it's a dinner party. First and foremost, I'm looking at everyone's facial expressions, and I'm really just looking at, how is the staff feeling today? What's the energy in the room? And then from that, we run our lineup. I've got a maitre d' who's in-house. I've got a bar manager, I've got the chefs. And then it really is just managing the fine details. I'm not afraid as an owner to jump in and bus a table just so people know that the table needs to be bussed. And I think in the very beginning of business, you really got to have all hands on deck, and that means me as well. But that service, the model that we've set a very high bar for ourselves with Camphor, which is we want Michelin star service that is not pretentious or stuffy. And I always use this line. There was a British Airways commercial from years ago, and the tagline was, a guy's on an international flight. He falls asleep. He wakes up. There's coffee and tea, sitting in front of him. And it just says British Airways, the best service anticipates the guest needs, right? So they knew he was about to wake up, and they got him served. And so I've told everybody that is the model to great hospitality. It really is reading and anticipating. So it is a constant just being on the floor, being present and observing in order to try to kind of anticipate those needs.
Yeah. So that, our business pays off in, interesting ways. I mean, obviously, the financial success is essential because you can't keep the doors open, you can't keep people employed. But you had a quote that resonated with me. You said, quote, "When you see the customers in the seats and you hang out with your staff and you see that you're providing for a lot of people, your family as well, and creating all these opportunities for people to meet and gather and mingle, those are the rewards," end quote. And I read an article recently about, just the role that restaurants play in our society. We celebrate, we mourn, first dates, wedding. I mean, it's, you name it, everybody can relate to the restaurant experience. But, and again, as I said, financial success is essential, but can you just elaborate a little bit on that feeling of walking around the room and the sense that you are, providing that kind of environment? You're hearing that laughter, the room has that certain sound, the plates are clanging, there's that energy. What's that feel like? How does that make you feel as the operator?
I mean, I think that is the hard to measure metric, right, of success in a restaurant. And I think especially coming out of what we went through the last 2 years, I think it's all that much more important, giving people the opportunity to gather. Right before we opened, we sat down. I had a couple friends who stopped by unannounced, and we just sat down and we were tasting food, testing food, and a few of the people I hadn't met. So it was a group of 4 of us, and I was just taken back. This is the first time I've actually sat down in a restaurant in years. And the conversation went from, a couple of us are new parents, from, rearing our children, to what the last couple of years are like, to business, to cocktails, to do you like a Negroni with more Campari or less. And so we had a conversation that went literally, across every topic. And we all left that moment all kind of like laughing and just texting each other saying, this was great, right? We just got to all sit down and do this wonderful thing. And reminded me even more so that is what we're really providing here, right? We're providing food, we're providing drink, but we're also providing an opportunity for people to connect. And to me, that is, very rewarding. Looking at my staff and seeing them, make money and being able to take care of their families, and having staff that, starts a family or creating those opportunities, that's the second part that, right there. It's like creating both of these opportunities. And it is that we're creating experiences, memories, and opportunities for people to celebrate, opportunities for people to make a living, who maybe otherwise an actor or actress. You've done business in LA. You've probably got some talent who work with you that are on TV now, might be in movies. And to see that this paid their rent, their whole way through that experience of trying to make it and go out to all these auditions. And then now they've become a successful person. So extremely rewarding. Not always the most efficient way of making a living, but
you're doing all right.
Yeah, but that value, I think, I can't put a price tag on that. That is I think the more rewarding part, honestly.
Absolutely, man. The expression, how can we miss you if you don't go away? The last couple of years, we haven't been able to have that experience, man, and how much, you realize that you miss it. I mean, staying at home was cool. Not having to get dressed was cool for a minute. But boy, when you can start to take that mask off and have a cocktail next to that friend of yours and just, have an evening like the one that you described, you realize how much you miss that and how vital those spaces are that provide that opportunity. So lastly, Cyrus, as you emerge and your profile grows, which I think it's just going to continue to do, I know mentoring as a Black man, I'm seeing more people of color getting into our industry, not just as chefs, but as operators as well. How do you approach mentoring? I know in the past, what I've tried to do is not speak as much necessarily from the things that I advise folks to do as much as what not to do, because there are a lot of mistakes that can be made in our industry. But how do you approach offering advice and mentoring?
So, my entire way through undergraduate and even graduate school, I was always part of a group that provided mentorship. I think when I was an undergraduate, it was a group called Making Transfer Easy. When I was working with Hill Harper, we did his Manifest Your Destiny program, Summer Empowerment Academy. I was kind of one of the first people that helped launch that with him, where we're taking 6th graders out of inner city 8th graders going into 9th grade and dealing with that transition. So mentorship has always been important to me. And that was also one of the biggest, and, I spoke with you during the pandemic, things that were going on in the background for me, and you were gracious enough to take phone calls and give advice. And for me, that was one of the biggest things out of, I think, the idea of, what the George Floyd moment meant to any one of us individually and what it meant to the society as a whole. I always operated I let my business speak for itself. I never wanted to be in the limelight. I wanted it to be about the brand, right? I didn't want it to be about, me per se. But then I was taken back with, who does a young brother have to look up to, right? Lock and Key, successful business. A lot of people did not know it was Black owned, Black, conceived. They thought it's another bar in Koreatown owned by Koreans that's, embracing the culture and kind of profiting off of it. Whereas it's me. And I could stand in a room next to 100 people and they wouldn't know I was owner Lock and Key, and I was fine with that. But then when I really thought about it is, what if a young DJ wants some advice on opening a bar or negotiating a contract? He needs, or they need, or she needs to be able to tap in with somebody or know where to go, at least to ask. So a big part about me stepping forward is basically making myself available to that. Is I want people to know that, hey, if we get some great success with Camphor and Lock and Key has had good success, you should know that there's a resource that exists, and I'm open and available, whether it's, sending an email or showing up at the restaurant to give that advice and that experience, because that brain trust is what it's all about.
Yeah, man. Well said. Cyrus, Batchan, we've got Lock and Key, Camphor, two of his places, Camphor being the newer one in the Arts District. And I want to thank you, man. I'm really, really proud of you, brother. And I love what you're doing, man. And I can't wait to see you next visit to LA. I'm making a beeline for your spot, man. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
So this segment of the show is How We Move. And the lovely lady joining me is Ambassador Shabazz. What's up?
How dost thou be?
I'm moving, grooving, and stretching when need to, so I don't pull anything.
That's all of us, I think. That's the same for all of us, I think, right now, how to bend and turn and get back to where you are, at least recognize yourself, after all of this. This was really, really a magnificent, interview and exchange. I would say 2 generations, listening to you, and kudos to his parents and their approach to exposing their children to their breadth in the world, breadth and breadth in the world, and how one moves is always reveals the tableau of options and choices and opportunities, and how one wants to express themselves, no matter the industry. And, I'm thinking about you and how I've watched you over the decades. And so the question is, for you as a generational restaurateur, in the same ways that you chart and manifest and bring to life your unique ideas and visions for concepts. And it's not easy. I mean, I watch you give birth and twist and turn but the outcome is always something that we are the beneficiary of. And so spending time with this young man, Mr. Batchan, how does that resonate for you when listening to such an unrestricted realizer?
What occurs to me is his clear vision that is not obstructed by, some of the things that I felt maybe were challenges along the way for me. The industry has evolved in a way also that makes room for an operator like him. But, his conscious choice, I guess, to, remain low key, behind the scenes, not known necessarily, that was not how I operated. I was very much in the room and very much a part of how I thought it was important to market whatever particular business I was involved in. However few opportunities there may have been along the way to do that in the way in which I might have wanted to, I still felt it was important to have a presence that was a visible presence and a known presence. And, and to hear him talk about, in terms of the mentoring, to use the example of a DJ that may have a desire to open a bar, and here's the owner potentially standing 5 feet away from you who happens to be a person of color and you don't know it. For that reason, it is also a value for him to make himself known. But I love his approach, and I love his lack of restraint and his desire to not be contained by any preconceived ideas about what his background or ethnicity or mixed ethnicity should mean that he should do.
Well, first of all, I think your is always what it is. And so when you're mindful, I think even reference the balance of the marketplace, how much of it is about him being visible versus the ideas being visible. But then also realizing once you have the business set, you have to be visible so that others like you know that you can actually bring forth any of these aspirations and these goals and these wishes and not feel so isolated. I think that you both do and approach things similarly. It's just different era and times. When we were growing up, it was essential. Otherwise, we were invisible. right? Now you can actually be invisible and yet ever present, right? So it's just how you have to navigate in different spaces. And if you're choosing places like Los Angeles with the fusions of culture and food, doesn't really need a match at the front door. No one needs to really know in some of the spaces he's in. And I think that's what we talk about. We're not removing our pride or presence as people of the diaspora. But if you're fancy, if you're intrigue, if your curiosities want to venture, we also have that entitlement to represent in that kind of way. I also, growing up when you grew up, there are people who would expect me to show up a certain way and would be surprised if I didn't always toe the same line. I may have had similar sentiments, but I don't always think I'm supposed to show up in duplicate or in some kind of stamped way to represent until I do, right? But I also come from the origins of exploration of expression, how that shows up. None of it has to deplete from who I am. It's just my composition of interests. Always want to figure out where's the natural way to make something plain. I mean, or express something.
Right. And, it also occurred to me too, and knowing how, you personally gravitate towards places where you tend to know somebody. Those are the places that, I know that you like to go, and you would always, help me to discover something interesting. What was a place on 3rd in LA where it had the great lamb burger what was that spot?
Fiddlers. Armenian background, Armenian Lebanese. It was, you did not need a condiment because it had a fusion of what was Mediterranean and Middle Eastern. Although they themselves were nationally Armenian, but the food was just for me, no matter what the cuisine was, breakfast, lunch, or dinner. But it was the hospitality, that it was home away from home. They provided the food for my daughter's shower. And I didn't ask for it. They did it. When we lost my mom and I got back to Los Angeles and could just sit in a corner somewhere, it was like being able to do that because it was right out my door, right front door. So really cool places. I think for me, it's knowing the owner alone is not it. It's the owner who feels like he or she is part of the community, and they know exactly what you need. For the most part, when I would walk into any restaurant, whether it's in the United States or abroad, and if it's a place I frequent, I don't have to order anything off the menu. They kind of know my thing. And even if I go there and I'm thinking I'm going to get something else, when they come over with my thing, I just surrender to the thing.
Yeah.
Right? Because
it's the comfort and the familiar hug, even if it's
that's exactly
it could be a physical hug, it could be a spiritual hug, but there's something to that.
Yeah, there is, and I think about it just even when we talk about New York. In Los Angeles, they know Roscoe's, and they don't know that the origination of the chicken and waffles came from Dickie Wells restaurant in New York, and that was a branch that moved to the West Coast. But Wells is where my mom surprised me with my 10th birthday party, with all the folks in Harlem and New York that would come. And then, of course, the cellar in my teen years, and when my mother needed to move through there, and then all of us having grown up with Alberta. So these are all people like front of the room. As little kids in Westchester County, New York, on Thursday nights, my mother, we would all get everybody bathed and into their footsie pajamas, and we would go to the neighborhood diner, which the owner was Gus, a Greek guy, right? And we would have a little section, he would have it waiting for us, and we would pile in as a tribe, and he would have food. So yeah, we knew the owners, but the owners loved their houses. They loved you sitting down at their tables, no matter where it was. And I don't know if you ever got to know Copeland's in Harlem.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So when my mom was in the hospital for that whole month, he just showed food was just coming in, and then that's where we did her repast. And So for me, it's really significant. And while living here in Louisville, Kentucky, my first couple of years, I put on all that weight drinking sweet tea and everything else that didn't have a vegetable nearby, until I discovered great place to eat, great place to find foods and put your elbows up on the table. And I find myself, whether the food is Persian or Italian or Ethiopian or Southern gourmet, that I realized when I was thinking about this conversation, I know all those owners too, right? So I think it's not just the food, because the food is magnificent in each of these places. It's the heart. It's meeting the heart when you walk into the threshold. If you're leaving your home to go someplace else to eat, it has to feel like a home away from home.
Heart, and it's the heart that you bring too, that I always look so forward to.
Well, thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
I think it's a world that we're all yearning to rejoin right now.
Yeah.
Right. I think whether the hug is virtual through these platforms and the corner table, or you get to walk through the threshold of a door, a home or a restaurant, we're looking for that. We want to do it safely, but it really does matter. I said to someone, I miss my two-sided hug, one left and right. I miss, that chest bump when you get up close, with someone. And how do we get back to that in a safe way, but not risk our heart's connection anymore?
Ambassador Shabazz, and how we move socially safely.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Good to see you.
You too.